places that you guys are interested in. Okay, so as for our speaker, Joel Thomas today, he has been teaching science since 2000. He's taught for a period of time in a formal classroom setting, then moved outside to direct outdoor school programs along the Oregon coast. After nearly 10 years, he started Glen's Gizmos alongside his wife, Roxanna, and they have been blessed to travel and teach together. Recently, they started the Glen's Gizmos homeschool hubs in Vancouver, Washington, and Newberg, Oregon. They now serve homeschoolers in the Pacific Northwest and beyond through classes, boat trips, scuba diving, videos, curriculum, and outdoor school programs. Sounds really fascinating. Let's welcome Joel Thomas.
All right, thanks for having me. So we are going to be doing some different lessons and things on marine biology. And you're going to have to kind of turn on that childlike side of your brain that's still there for everybody. It'll be a lot of fun. There'll be some transitions, a lot of hands-on stuff you get to do today, some stuff that's just very interactive, as well as a lot of what today is going to be about is showing you the beauty of God's design around us right here in the Pacific Northwest. The design of marine life is incredible, and it's so different than what we see on land sometimes in so many fun ways, but still has such beauty in it. And so I think it's a great opportunity for us to look and marvel at some of those things. So that's part of what today will be about. And we'll have a lot of information coming your way today too, which will be fun. I usually present with kids, so you'll get some of the ridiculous punny jokes and stuff like that will be part of today too. So hopefully you can enjoy those with me. All right. So we're going to start out first by talking about a critter that a lot of people really enjoy finding on the beach, at least the leftover shell. By the way, did I tell you there's going to be a test in a little bit? There's going to be a test. It's kind of hard, and you're going to each have to take your own, so we'll see how you do. But this critter is a sand dollar, and so we're going to start out by talking about sand dollars and the design of a sand dollar and how that's an incredible and a beautiful thing. In order to do that, though, there'll be several different transitions we'll make today, as well as some different things we work on together. And so the very first one that we need to make is we're going to pass out a few things to you in just a second. And so one of the things is going to be, you thought you were done with school, but I got a worksheet for you that you can choose to fill out. And I don't know that I have enough for every single person, but if you kind of do it in groups where if you're like a spouse couple that came together or something like that, you can work on it together for that. And that'll be good. And you should already have a pencil, right? If you don't, you can grab one of those too. This is my wife, Roxanna. She's going to help pass out a plate, which you'll need in a little bit because this is a church and we're going to make a total mess if we don't have some good plates around. And some worksheets, and that'll give you something to write on. And then if you need a pencil, we do have a few more of these pre-sharpened pencils right here, because I know some of you kids out there will just spend forever at a pencil sharpener instead of getting anything done, so it'll be good. Anyway, those are going to come on around to you right now. Actually, can I get one of those from you, Mark, before you? Thank you. Awesome. And then I sometimes do stuff with PowerPoints. Today, you get a little different thing because we are going to work right here off the table with just my phone, and that'll be good. A good way to go. All right. So, sand dollars, which I have a whole pile of them as well, and actually those are going to have to go around too, but I was passing out too much stuff for one person to take. Like this are called eccentric sand dollars. Are you guys willing to help pass these out so everyone who wants one can have one? You might follow Roxanna around so they already have a plate to put it with. So the sand dollar we have today, I do actually have some live ones as well. This one is a dead one. So this one is one that has died and all the spines have come off of it. And you're going to get a chance to take a look at this. And this is what the worksheet is a picture of. We do a lot of curriculum design stuff. So like the pictures in the worksheet are stuff we do as we create worksheets for kids to be able to use. which has been really great. So our sand dollars in Oregon are kind of unique. God didn't give us sand dollars quite like the rest of the world has exactly. In our case, we have something called an eccentric sand dollar. It's the only species that lives here in Oregon and Washington, here in the Northwest. And if you look in the middle, they have a flower shape, right, that petallidium. And that flower shape is actually off-center or off-balance, right? So if somebody's a little bit off, they're eccentric, right? And in the case of a sand dollar like this, it's called an eccentric sand dollar because the flowery shape is off-center or off-balance. Now, I talk to kids a lot about how God designed our lungs to work inside our body and how they have to be inside our body, because if they were hanging out like this, not only would we be incredibly handsome, but we'd have a real problem, right? We wouldn't be able to keep them the right amount of moisture, among other things, so we couldn't get the gas exchange to happen. And then that helps people understand that, oh, you know, gills are outside the body because they are moist all the time in their environment under the water. So in the case of a sand dollar like this, that petallidium, that flowery shape, those are actually the spots where the skin gills stick up. And before we get going too far, most of you are probably already aware of this, but when we're talking about sand dollars, we're talking about echinoderms, right? And I talk to kids quite a bit about this so they understand that, you know, big Latin words or Greek words, they look really scary, but especially the Latin words, you can break them down. And so we break that one down like this, right, for them. And most of you probably know what derm means, I'm guessing. Yeah, so we got skin going on here. Skin, like a dermatologist. Echino means, most people would put spiny. Another version of that would be hedgehog. So we're talking about spiny-skinned creatures, right? So echinoderms are things that usually have spiny-looking skin or really spiny skin. They usually have five-sided symmetry called pentamerism, from penta, right, for five, merism. And they usually have radial symmetry. So it's helpful for a kid to understand that some things God did where scientists group things together, right? And then some scientists, of course, if they are claiming evolution is the way that things happened, are going to claim that because things have similar components, they must have a common ancestor, right? Or similar genetics. But another way of looking at it, of course, is the idea that because they're similar, it shows similar design and a similar artist or creator behind it, which is the way I look at it. And that's how I talk to kids about it. And so in the case of these different echinoderms, you'll see that there are some similarities, even though they look vastly different. Like a sea cucumber looks nothing like a sand dollar, which looks nothing really like a sea star at first glance. But there are a lot of similarities. And so, has everyone got a worksheet if they wanted one? Pretty close to it? Okay, let's talk about it right here. So this echinoderm, this sand dollar right here, has this flowery shape in the middle. In fact, if you look very closely at it, which we will in a little bit, then you'll be able to see that these are actually little slits, sideways slits, if you look close at the one that you have. And those little slits poke up through that shell bit, which isn't actually called the shell, by the way. And the skin gills would stick up through that like a little fuzzy flower shape. And there's a very good reason why it's off-center, which we'll find out about in a second, too. So that flowery shape, if you feel like writing it, is called a petallidium. A petallidium. And each one of these little spots with a little slit is where a skin gill sticks through. And so they get their oxygen straight through their backs, right? Which is an incredible thing. Because you're going to learn in a little bit with that off-center petallidium that allows them to live the way that God has designed this particular one to live and given it the ability to live. And then right here in the middle, there's these little spots called the gonopores, which is where this animal would spawn from, right? So male and female, they'd spawn from those points. And then, there you go. Yeah, so those gonopores. And when a sand dollar spawns, they spawn and they just shoot the sperm and the eggs right out into the water, right? Because they count on this mass reproduction strategy to be able to survive. That's what they've got going for them. And when the little egg hatches, it hatches into something that doesn't look anything like a sand dollar. It hatches into like a little thing that looks kind of like a little clear ghosty thing, right? And that little clear ghosty thing becomes part of the zooplankton, which means animal wanderer, right? So you can have phytoplankton, which are the light-loving wanderers, light-loving plankton, the plants, or the algae rather, and then you have the animal ones. And so these little larvae is that. And then it moves from that, after it kind of consents an adult colony down below it, it'll swallow a little grain of sand, or take it into its body, which makes it kind of heavy. Then it drops to the bottom, and it grows into a little young sand dollar among all the bigger adults. And so that's how it can tell. It's like, I tell kids, it's like if you were just floating by down the road, and you could smell your parents there in the house, right? And you decided that was the place to go because you could smell them somehow in there. Maybe they're good cooking or something. Hopefully that's what it is. And so that's how these little sand dollars can find their home to live in. And they live in colonies. They don't really live by themselves. And my personal theory is that part of the reason for that, it could be that they actually are able to change the water currents directly over the colony. I've seen some information about that, and so I'm curious about that more, based on how they're turned like a little rudder, which we'll talk about soon. All right. And then, of course, they have these spines, which we're going to see in a little bit. So sand dollars aren't covered in hairs. They aren't really covered in cilia. They're covered in little spines. A sand dollar is a sea urchin that God decided to make flat like a pancake, right? And so that's what you're looking at with a sand dollar. It's a flat sea urchin, basically. All right, I told you there's a test, right? Are you ready for it? You've already taken it. You didn't even know it. So scientists don't call a sand dollar shell a shell. It's got a lot of little holes in it, and it's kind of built into the body of the animal a little more. And the living parts of the sand dollar actually poke out through it all over. And so they actually call that a test. So there you go. That's your test. You took it. It was kind of hard, wasn't it? I told you there'd be ridiculously punny jokes. More are coming, don't worry. All right. If we look at the ventral side, we can see that the sand dollar has a mouth. My paper's a little wet. Then there are lines that go to the mouth that are called feeding tracts. And then right near the edge, I usually have kids clean that up real good with their fingers, so they're sitting there, wiping it a lot like this to get all the sand off. You can do that if you want to. And then I tell them what it is. So sand dollars have a complete digestive tract. That means when food goes in one end, it has to come out another end, right? And so then we talk about what that little hole is, which is the anus, of course, right? So then if you got enough middle schoolers in the room, especially the boys, you get a lot of chuckling, which is great. All right. So that's the sand dollar parts that you're going to see really clearly on a test like this, like what you find at the beach. People sometimes wonder, why do I find so many sand dollars all on the same beach? Well, part of it is they only live in colonies. They don't really live individually, right? In most places, they're living just beyond the waves and the breakers because they can't take the waves. So they have to be just beyond them. And if they get up in the waves, they get smashed and drug up onto the beach, right? And then sometimes there's seasons when you go out to the beach and you'll find like dozens of these on the beach at once. And you just find them all over. And then there's other times when you don't find any. My theory about that, which I think is probably accurate, is that whole colonies of sand dollars probably get smothered under the sand and killed as the sand moves so much on the shore. And then it erodes back off or washes back off the top of the colony, and then they get pushed up onto the shore at all about the same time. And so I think that's why we often see them come in waves, so to speak, on the shoreline. So that's our sand dollar. We're going to do something else with that in a little bit. So you can take that little thing and set it off to the side. For the next thing, we're going to pass out some live sand dollars. And we brought a lot of different live critters. The state of Oregon allows us to have scientific take permits so we can collect animals and bring them into people for education. And so sand dollars are one of the things that we get to collect a bunch of. So Roxanna here, and if somebody else wants to help her, they could, is going to help carry around some sand dollars in a bucket and pass one out to like every other person or so. There you go. And then those will come around to you. This is part of what the plate's for, right? So you don't make a big mess. here in the church, and we're about to make a much larger mess after all this, so the plate will be even handier by that point. So the first thing I want you to do once you get the sand dollar is just establish how do you know it's alive. And one of the fun things for me is sharing about God's creation from the ocean is that a lot of stuff even the adults have never gotten to see, right? So how many of you have never, maybe I'll put it this way, how many of you have seen or held a live sand dollar that's moving before? If you look around the room, it's not that many of us. And so it'll be a fun experience for you to get to see that today because they are fun little critters. And we almost always see them when they're dead on the beach, not alive and moving with their spines. And that one up there, you can already see it's starting to move. While those are coming around, I'm going to go on ahead and switch this over to connect it to this microscope here so I can use this a little bit with you. I need to grab a piece of duct tape. I stuck it on the chair and forgot to bring it up with me. Once you get that sand dollar too, check out the ventral and the arboreal side, the top side. See if both sides are actually covered in spines. And hopefully you get a chance to enjoy it. They're also fun if you want to take a video of the spines moving with your phone. People enjoy that sort of thing because you can see them real good with a phone usually. There we go. It always takes me a moment to get this set up. Oops. Almost there. Yeah. Oh. Hey, you know what would help if I turn on the light? That would probably help us out here. I'm going to figure out which one. It's the bottom one. That's why. Oop. Hang on a second. We'll do it this way if we need to. Not that one. That one. There it is. All right. So we're going to pull this up just because it's pretty to see, and we'll use this a little bit later on. But I just really enjoy getting to see the little spines as they move on them. So a sand dollar like this, like I told you before, it is like a flat version of a sea urchin, right? It's another one of those times when God took an amazing design he had and kind of reused it for a little bit different critter. And when you look at this sand dollar and you look at the little spines on the ventral side and then on the arboreal side, so this is the bottom side, we'll turn it over. Here comes the top side. You'll actually find that both sides have a lot of movement going on when you look close, and it's really pretty, like little jewels moving around, especially on the top. The sand dollars usually have the bottom spines kind of trying to turn in circles, and the top ones are often going in waves to try to push sand over themselves. And anyone who's feeling brave, we got any brave souls out there? Put your arm out like that for a second and rest the sand dollar on your wrist, on that real soft spot where you can feel everything, right? And then just wait a little while. So sand dollars don't have much of a brain. They have the instincts that God has given them and built into them, which is miraculous to me that God can do that with animals at all. But they don't have much of a brain. So when they're sitting on your warm wrists like that, what's going on is they're getting warm and they're thinking, oh, if they were thinking, I'm in the sunshine, so I got to get out of the sunshine so I don't get too hot, dry out my skin gills, or get sunburned, right? And so it starts digging. And right now the sand dollar is beginning to get frantic. It's moving faster and faster as I'm watching it. And it's trying to dig into the sand. So if you've got it on your wrist, you can imagine what it's trying to do. And in a little bit, it'll really start tickling. And after it does that, then throw it back upside down and take a look at how fast it's moving now. Now it's just waves of motion because this sand dollar currently is frantic. It is sprinting as fast as it can to escape that heat, which, I mean, if you waited all day, it might make it, I don't know, a few inches. Mostly they would just go in circles. All right. The thing in the middle that's kind of light, that's one of the feeding tracts. You can see those on the bottom. And they actually don't have spines in those feeding tracts if you look at them. The spines along the edges of them are quite long. And then if you move down those feeding tracts to the middle, you hit the mouth right there in the middle. And the mouth of a sand dollar, we're going to talk about in a little bit, has that five-sided symmetry too, because God tends to work in order and patterns and brings a lot of things that are balanced and beautiful, right? Things that we perceive as beautiful because God made our minds to perceive things beautiful that he made beautiful. And so when we're talking about a sand dollar, we're talking about pentamerism. So I talk a lot about patterns with kids because kids really understand that well. So on the top of a sand dollar, of course, there's the 5 parts of the petallidium because the animal grew from the center 5 ways the same, right? With radial symmetry, unlike you and I who grew up and out, and then as we get older, we don't tend to grow up anymore. We just grow the other way, right? And so in the case of a sand dollar, they grow from the middle and they grow out 5 ways the same. And so we talk about how God repeats that pattern multiple times within this organism because of the way he designed it to develop. So inside there's going to be 5 little teeth as well, sand dollar doves, inside the sand dollar, in an Aristotle's lantern, and we're going to look at those in a little bit. Let's talk about how this animal lives because I think it's pretty amazing. So if you look at the sand dollar, you can see that there's a little light edge to it. Look at the one you have, it'll have it too. And then there's a real dark, 3/4 of it is really dark, right, approximately? Do you see that on yours? So take the light part and put it down and put your fingers over the light part so the dark part is up. So 3/4 of the sand dollar approximately will be up in the air. And most of the sand dollars in the world don't live this way. Most of them live flat like this, and they eat stuff off the bottom or scrape up algae or plants. This sand dollar lives on edge like this, and the design of it's amazing because the petallidium is off-center on purpose so that it can live on edge, so that it can get oxygen to the top of the sand dollar, right? If it was right in the middle, half of it would be buried in the sand. It'd be like somebody covering your mouth up so you couldn't breathe very well. And so the sand dollar has that petallidium off-center on the dark side. And then when you look at this also with the shape of it, as the water comes, the sand dollar turns in the water to control the eddies and currents around its body to be able to trap food better. And when you have acres and acres and acres of sand dollars living every inch apart, or less sometimes, then the entire colony can turn and affect the water current right over the colony, different ways. I don't think they know they're working together, but they probably are, right? Because that's how they were made. And when the water hits the top of them, it hits this spot right here that needs the strong oxygen first, right? It hits the gills poking out of the petallidium. And then it swirls around the back edge here, and it traps stuff with its spines as the water's swirling around the backside of the sand dollar. And if the current's too strong, they can turn a little bit like a sailboat to adjust how those eddies are forming behind them, which is pretty amazing. And then in their little spines, they'll be like a little jail. The little bit of usually algae that are floating by, things like that, are going to get captured in those little spines. They'll close on them like a little jail. They'll cover them in slime, pass them with like little tube feet, little suckers, or like little microscopic pinchers called pedicellariae. Those kinds of things, they'll pass them and their spines, of course, down the feeding tracts where they have them kind of in jail, right? And they can pass them down. And then they'll shove them in the mouth to grind them up and eat them. And then to make the design even better, where they go to the bathroom is exactly at the top edge up here where it'll wash away after they go, right? So it's really a great design for a little animal that just sits on edge like this. Anyway, I think they are really beautiful, so that's why I wanted to start you out with them, because I think they're A beautiful critter that lives right here in the Northwest, and they're fun to see. So, all right. So we're going to have those recollected now. When the bucket comes around, put them in flat, because if you put them in on edge, they'll shoot to the bottom like a knife, and they can crack the edge of them. They do regenerate the edge of them, like they'll regrow and heal themselves really well. That's one of the characteristics of these echinoderms, is they can regenerate body parts usually really well. I tell the kids I wish we could do that. It would sure save on things like medical and dental bills. Especially the way, well, sharks are not an echinoderm, but they're very impressive also that way. And the way that they can heal their skin because of the dermal denticles, or regrow extra, rows of teeth that they can just shift up for themselves. All right. Now we're going to do something terrible. Are you ready? We're going to take that nice little sand dollar test that you have, and we're going to crush it. Well, we're going to try to break it in a more organized fashion than that. Don't feel too bad about it, because I get a lot of them where I go. So, but we are going to attempt to just find some of the design inside and look at the beauty inside this test as well. Of course, to tests like this, the spines have all fallen off. It's been rubbed in the sand over time. If you find them really white on the beach, it's because the sun has bleached them out as well. They've been rubbed in the sand and then they've been bleached. If you get one like this that isn't white and you want it to bleach and harden, you drop it in hydrogen peroxide for a little bit. You get it out and dry it real good, and then you Mod Podge it with Elmer's glue. And you get a real nice hard sand dollar. All right. So in a moment, what you're going to do is on your paper plate, so you don't make a huge mess. And if you need a paper plate, we'll hook you up with one. You'll actually take, but try not to break it right in half, because we're going to look at the structure inside here, right? And you'll actually break around the outside edge of the sand dollar. Oop, I broke mine a little bit in half. That's okay, though. I know it doesn't feel right to do this, but it's okay. And after you get all the way around the whole thing, you open it up like an Oreo cookie with whatever part you can keep together. I didn't do a very good job. Hopefully yours will stay together better than mine. And then you can look at the different parts of the test and the structure of it. You can look at the little slits that run through it. And you can look for the little sand dollar doves, which are a fun thing to find, that look like this. So they look like little birds, which is why some people call them sand dollar doves. And there's a pretty little poem about sand dollars that somebody wrote I saw one time. Maybe some of you have seen that. And so on this little dove, there should be 5 of them because of pentamerism, because God does things in an ordered fashion. On the back edge, there are these wing structures. Anytime you see something wide like that with bones or tooth structure, you're probably thinking muscle attaches there. On the front edge, there's a little point, which is where the tip of that tooth is effectively, that grinds up the food. And then there would be 5 of them in a circle that make a perfect little star. I'll see if I can find all 5 of mine and put them together on the paper for you in a moment. After you find them, because it's a fun thing to do, we're going to bring around some little vials for you. And you can put your little sand dollar doves in a little vial so you don't lose them, right? Because you want to keep them forever on your dresser probably. And then we can bring around a string throughout the rest of the presentation today, or have it up here, and you can come up if you wanted to, either for yourself or, a child or a grandkid or somebody else, a niece or nephew. You could put a little string under that hinge, tie the other end, you have a little necklace that's kind of fun for the kids or for yourself to keep, right? And then if you're a kid, of course, you put that by your mirror, keep it forever till you lose it and think your friend took it by accident, or who knows. But so those will be fun. Those are coming around right now. I'm going to go ahead and attempt, those are coming, to assemble a little star up here of these sand dollar doves. I've got one, yeah. I don't have a live one now. All right. So while I'm putting this together for you, so you get to see this, I got a question for you, which actually we'll leave the string up here if you decide to go that route, and we'll send the vials around. You want to take one of those around to everybody who would like one? All right. So I got some important questions for you to answer. You ready? If you take a sand dollar and you break it into 4 pieces, what do you get? Yeah, sand quarters. Now you're getting it. The kids always look at me like I'm crazy, right, when I start talking like this. And then it gets really hard because some of them have never even seen, like, well, what do you get if you get 10 pieces? Dimes, 20 pieces. Nickels, and 100 pieces. Sand cents, yeah. And the kids look at me like I'm crazy because some of them have never even seen a nickel or a penny hardly anymore. It's bizarre. And then, okay, here we go. Since we're on a roll with the really good jokes today. If you have a sand dollar on the beach and a duck, right, comes walking down the beach and picks up the sand dollar in its mouth, what do you have? Yeah, a dollar bill. I know, it's a pretty good one. So I'm going to try to tease these out of here. At least one of mine has broken prior. So if all the teeth were together, which these ones are not completely together, and you separate them out, you actually can get a perfect little star the way that they sit together, right? And that little structure is what scientists often call an Aristotle's lantern if it's in a sea urchin. So the sand dollar one tends to get the same name, but this doesn't look like the gas lantern that Aristotle had designed that gave it that name. But the sea urchin ones do more so. And so with those little teeth in there, which are just a great thing to be able to find. All right. We're going to, well, you're finishing those off and having fun doing that. By the way, if you didn't find any of those little doves, and you're heartbroken, because I know some of you are, I can see it, and you're about in tears because your sibling found more of them than you did, you can come up here and get another sand dollar and do it again. I don't mind. Won't hurt my feelings. It'll be great. So what we're going to do next is we're going to bring in a few other critters. I don't know where Roxanna went to, if she's still in here or not. She may or may not be. We're going to bring in a few other echinoderms here in a moment to be able to look at and take a look at. Like other echinoderms that exist that are in that group are things like sand dollars, sea urchins, right? Sea stars, sea cucumbers, those kinds of things. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to make you do this part, but I'm going to go on ahead and do this real quick because it can be helpful to see why scientists kind of group these organisms together. So I'm going to cut out a little sea star shape here. Thank you, Roxanna. With 5 rays to it. Now, not all echinoderms exhibit pentamerism with those 5 parts the same, that radial symmetry, but many do. Some have more, like the big sun stars. Those, of course, have like, you can get 30 or more rays on some of those. Okay. So here is our sea star right here. I'm going to back this off so you can get a really wide perspective here on it. Here's the little sea star I've just cut out. There we go. And with this sea star, sometimes it can be really hard to tell what something that doesn't look quite the same, why scientists would even group it together. So with a sea star like this, it has this 5-sided symmetry. If I was to take it and put it lengthwise with the rays back like this, and it would squish out lengthwise, if you looked from the end, you'd have 5 rows of muscle in there, and you might have 5 rows of tube feet coming out the sides, right? And you'd have something that would look quite a bit like a sea cucumber, right? And then if you folded those in and made a ball out of them, you'd have tube feet around the outside, 5-sided symmetry, and spikes sticking out. You might have something that looks quite a bit like a sea urchin. And then if you squish that flat, like this, like a bow, then you'd have something that looks quite a bit like a sand dollar, right? And so that is part of the reason why they group them together. I always have to kind of lead off with that because when we start looking at these other critters, they don't look like they should be grouped together at all to most people. So you've just looked at a sand dollar. Here we have a couple different types of sea stars. We've got an ochre star here, which we'll pass around. We have an orange one and a purple one. So they're going to be coming your way to take a look at them. And then we grabbed, let's put them in two separate bins. And then we grabbed a couple of the big pink sea stars for you to see too. These sea stars are one that gets quite large. So this is one here. Believe it or not, this one's actually kind of small. They used to be really big. You don't find really big ones anymore because of a virus that went through, and it went through like, 10, 15 years ago, and it killed almost all of the sea stars on the Oregon coast, like almost all of them. And I don't see sun stars on the Oregon coast, the big multi-race stars. And this one has this virus. All of them have the virus pretty much. It just depends on whether their body, whether God built in the programming to adapt so that their body can survive the virus or not, right? And whether individually they have those things turned on or off or have the genetic components for that. In this case, this one is surviving the virus, but you can tell it has trouble when you look at it because it looks deflated, like a deflated balloon. And so sea star wasting is a virus that attacks the sea star's ability to make connective tissue. So as they are growing, here you go, you can pass that back and forth down the row. I'll start one out over here too. As they're growing, their body, instead of building more connective tissue, once they reach a certain size, their body literally just starts to disintegrate and fall apart. And then one ray will crawl one way, and another ray will go that way, and their body just separates. And it kills them because they don't have the ability to make that connective tissue. Normally, without that virus, God gave them the ability to regenerate body parts, right? And so a sea star, a healthy sea star, if it loses a ray, can actually just regrow a new one. But with that virus, they can't do that successfully. So once the ray falls apart and breaks off and crawls off to do its own thing and then dies pretty quick, then their body just can't continue to regrow. They can if you want to. Did you bring in the sea cucumbers yet? No, do you want me? Yeah, let's take a look at them while we're at it right now. No, it's okay. All right. Now there is a little experiment I want to do, which maybe I'll do that, I'll do it in a second. Or I can just tell you about it and you can try it if you want to. So do you want a piece of homework? You're getting worksheets and homework, all of that in one day. Can you believe it? So if you want a piece of homework, this is fun homework, don't worry. Next time you go to a tide pool, somewhere where you can get a sea star off a rock pretty carefully, what you do is you got to bring somebody with you who has a very hairy arm. Have you got somebody in mind? Okay, good. And don't tell them what you're doing then. Just let them wonder, right? And then a sea star has those spines on its back that stick up, especially those pink ones. When you poke them, they're really sharp, actually. And those spines are part of their dermal skeleton, right? You can have endoskeletons, which are skeletons inside the body that the muscle goes in and attaches to. You can have exoskeletons, which is a hard shell or a skeleton outside, like an arthropod would have, or something like a crab, right? And then you can have dermal skeletons, which is what a sea star has, which is a skeleton built right into the skin. And so the little sharp bits are part of the skeleton that sticks up, effectively. And then throughout the middle of that, there's the really soft, mushy parts. On the pink sea stars that are coming around, it's actually kind of the dark purplish blotches, the little ones. Those are the skin gills that stick up, just like the sand dollar had to breathe, right? When it's out of the water, it's going to pull those in. And then all around those, on the pink ones, all of them have these, but they're really obvious on those, there are little light pink or white clumps of things that look like little bacteria cultures in a petri dish. Those are actually little clumps with thousands of small pinchers. So most people don't realize sea stars are covered in tiny microscopic pinchers all over their body. They're called pedicellariae, and they look like little crab pinchers. and they're actually pretty strong. So in a moment, we'll bring one of them up here so you can look at it. But the sea star pinchers, if you take somebody with a hairy arm and you turn the sea star over so the side of its ray or the back of it hits their arm, and the sea star starts trying to clean the skin gills with those little pinchers, right, and throw things off and protect itself. So what do you think it grabs a hold of? Yeah, and depending on the species of sea star and how feisty it's feeling at the moment, they will rip the hairs clean out of your arm sometimes. And so it's pretty exciting to the kids, though. They like it. A couple times I've had them hang on so tight you can just let it hang there by your arm hairs. It's pretty fun until you got to get them off. All right, I got a few other things here that are some of those echinoderms that God gave us, because God sure was creative. These ones are sea cucumbers, which are possibly the grossest creatures in the ocean here. At least they have the grossest sounding words associated with them. So each one of these sea cucumbers, when we go on ahead and pass these around, I'm going to put a little bit of water in there. Try not to pick them up, though, because sea cucumbers get stressed really easy, right? So feel them with your finger if you want to. And on each one of them, I'm going to place a tiny little decorator crab for you to look at as well as it comes around, okay? Because they're hanging out with them right now. So look for a couple things on these sea cucumbers. Look for tiny little decorator crabs, and look for something called a scale worm, a commensal scale worm. And commensal is one of those ways you can describe relationships between things. You can have things that are parasitic, which means a parasite harms the host, right, and sucks the blood, that sort of thing. Then you can have things that are symbiotic, which means they help each other out kind of mutually in a partnership that God designed them for. And in the case of these little commensal worms, I think it might be more symbiotic than people think. Probably we just haven't looked at it close enough to really understand the relationship there, because God made things to live in relationship. But a commensal means like they kind of share the same space and live there together, but they don't actually help or hurt each other particularly. So on these sea cucumbers, they have, these guys sometimes drain an awful lot of water out their hind end, which you can imagine the franticness when I take that and squirt it all over where the kids are sitting at their tables. I'll spare you that today. So this sea cucumber here has these tube feet on one side. Most sea cucumbers actually have tube feet on 5 rows down each side, right? That pentamerism again, that design that's there. It has this spiny looking skin on the back, though it's actually quite soft. And if you handle them too much, the red pigment and the skin actually starts to come off on your hands like paint, which is really odd looking. It looks like you're bleeding, but it's them. And then one end has kind of a hard, lumpy feeling to it. And inside of there are all of these frilly palm tree looking parts, right, that they stick out like this. Sea cucumbers are basically the janitors of the ocean. This type is. So this type doesn't filter feed in the water. A lot of them do. This type doesn't. This type crawls along the bottom and has these huge dust mop things it sticks out. And then it dust mops the bottom of the ocean for all the detritus and shoves it in its mouth and licks it off, right? And then it goes for the next one, and then the next one. And that's what its entire life is crawling along the bottom, just doing that over and over again, cleaning the bottom of the ocean. And when it does that, it's eating everything, which means its digestive tract is pretty full of sand and mud and all the other stuff that's not digestible. So that comes out the back end, of course, all the time as it moves. And so you get a lot of that. But I always tell kids, they're really going to like the sea cucumbers for a couple reasons. Number one, sea cucumbers have an odd way that they breathe. So their gills are located inside their body mostly, somewhat towards their hind end. And I explain to kids that as you're watching one of these big sea cucumbers underwater, the rear end of it, where it goes to the bathroom, is going like this. And then I ask them what they think it's doing, right? And the reality is they take in water to get their oxygen through their rear end and then pass it over their gills, which are located back there, which kids cannot believe is the case. But that is the case. And then I explained to them that it's a good thing God didn't make them like a sea cucumber. And then the other thing that's kind of fun about sea cucumbers is they have that ability that God gave most of the echinoderms to regenerate body parts, right? A lot of ocean creatures can do it. So in the case of a sea cucumber, I tell the kids there's a really disgusting word they have to say that they're going to remember forever because it's so gross sounding. You ready? That means you got to say it after me. Are you ready? You got to say the word evisceration. Oh, it just sounds gross, doesn't it? Wash out your mouth with soap. So evisceration means when they get stressed, like something's picking at them too much, like a crab or a seagull or whatever, then they have the ability to take about a third of their intestines, guts, reproductive organs, and they shoot them out their back end into a little pile and disconnect from them. And they leave them in a little stack of intestines sitting there wherever they are. And then they can crawl away and grow new guts, right? Well, those are being eaten by the predator, so they escape. It's a mighty weird world we've been given. The creativity is far beyond me to be able to understand how God thought up all that. But okay, here's a scale worm. I was going to show you one of these. So right here is one of those commensal scale worms. It's not hurting the sea cucumber. It's not potentially not helping the sea cucumber. It's just there. And it holds on pretty tight. They're called scale worms because they have armored plates on their back over each set of legs, basically. And those armored plates are there to protect them, obviously. Here, we'll see if we can get it a little bigger for you. There it is. So sometimes we get polychaetes in the clamworms too, but those scale worms are almost always on sea cucumbers because there's certain animals that God just kind of designed to help each other out and live with each other. All right. I have a snail in there we're going to look at after our break because we'll be taking a break at some point here. Have any of you ever seen a moon snail? Yeah, and so I've got a pretty big moon snail in here that you get to see. If you've never seen the largest snail species in the Northwest, you're in luck. We happen to have one here. So, all right. Let me think if there's anything else I want to show you there. I don't think so. Where did Mark go? There he is. Do you want me to take the break now or do something else for a few more minutes?
This could be a good time.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, here's some of that. You remember I told you the sea cucumbers fall apart on you eventually? Do you see the little bits of red stuff on my finger? That is their skin beginning to come off a little bit, the pigment in their skin.
Well, this is very interesting. Creepy, crawly critters. Very interesting. Thank you, Joel. So let's take a break until 10:20. We'll resume here. Refreshments can be enjoyed in the hallway. Far more hands-on than we normally have here. Thank you, Joel. And doing so much of the work is Roxanna, too. Thank you, Roxanna.
All right. We'll pass out. Are you willing to help pass out a few of these again? I got a few more if you're willing to help with it, too. But I'll have Roxanna help out her if you're willing to. So we're going to pass out some of these. These are graph paper. See, not only did you have to do a worksheet today and you got some homework, but now you've got graph paper. So that'll be good. We're going to talk about snails a little bit because snails are fun. And then we're going to talk about crabs some because that'll be good too. In this next little bit. So for snails are something that scientists would classify as a gastropod, right? And some of you probably know what gastropod means. So pod means leg, right? Ped and pod, right? Leg, foot. And then gastro means stomach. Yeah, so here we have our stomach foot creatures. And they're the ones that are going to crawl around on their foot. Not to be confused with cephalopods, which are the head foot creatures. like an octopus or a squid or something like that, a cuttlefish. So these are gastropods. And the snails in Oregon, of course, can be really small, like little periwinkles, and then they can get all the way up into the moon snail sizes, which have shells about the size of a softball as the top size, and a body about the size of a very large plate. And so we're going to take a look at one of them in a little bit and talk about that animal and why it's unique. Now, on land, when people think about snails, they're thinking an herbivore, right, usually. Like the little things in your garden that you try to kill with various methods or various strange anecdotal things that you found online and really hope work but probably don't, right? All those weird ways, I don't know, Pepsi, beer, crushed up bottles, little bits of shell, oyster shells. I mean, I've heard so many weird ways to try to get rid of them. But in the ocean, most of the snails in the ocean, so many of them don't eat plant material. They aren't herbivores. They are carnivores and predators in the ocean often. A few of them are even parasites. And so some snails in the ocean, like little olive snails, they actually sometimes spend their life as a parasite digging around inside of another organism, living inside of it like a crab that they might live in as a parasite. And then they come out and they live free living for the second part of their life, right? And then other snails, like the one we're about to look at, are predators that drill holes into other organisms and digest them in their own shell and then slurp out the insides. And so that's the snail we're about to look at today, is one of the snails that does that. A lot of the snails at the tide pools are actually eating barnacles or little mussels. They're eating other things with a hard shell that they can use their radula to drill a hole in and then eat them by slurping them out, basically, after they digest them partway. And so the moon snail is one of those creatures that we're looking at today that does that. I'm going to put it, otherwise it could make the biggest mess known to humankind very quickly, up here. And moon snails, not only are they a predatory thing, but they're large and they hold a lot of water, so we have to try to control that a little bit. Okay, we'll see if I can get a hold of it. It's a little stuck. There we go. Okay, so this is a moon snail. And a moon snail like this is like a 3/4 size moon snail. It's pretty big that was found. Uh-oh. Are the projectors actually on? Oh, maybe that's what did it, huh? Hang on, I'll try to get it back. If not that, I might have to... Well, and in all reality, I don't actually need this anymore. I did the parts I need with it earlier. So that's okay. Because it may be that it's not going to cooperate. That'll be okay. So the parts that I really wanted that for, we've already got done, I think, which is good. So a moon snail like this has the huge foot underneath. We're going to rearrange how this is going to work here. There we go. The huge foot underneath, making it that gastropod, right, the big stomach foot. It has on this end a little spot where it makes a little tube by curling part of its body here to take oxygen-rich water in and out inside of its body. And then right here on the front, it may poke them up later, we'll see, these two little eye stalks that poke out. And they look like little thin triangles, like you cut them out of paper or something that come up. And then, of course, it has that awesome shell, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and then the huge body. Moon snails are really good at sliming just about everything. And so you are more than welcome to touch it as it comes by or even hold it. They feel really cool. They eventually, after enough people hold it, it is going to close up. And that's okay. For now, you just don't try to make it close up on purpose so other people get to see it if they can. If it does close up, it's still pretty impressive. And we'll see what happens. So we're going to put it in here. I'm going to dip a little water into this. And then we'll pass this around for you to get to see it. In a few moments, we're going to use that graph paper and talk about Fibonacci numbers. Because the moon snail has a part of it, the shell's pretty amazing with its spiral pattern, But there's a part of a moon snail called an operculum, which has this trap door that closes after the snail goes in. That's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, and it directly follows the Fibonacci pattern. And so I want you to see that, because sometimes you see patterns like that, and people overlay a line, and it sort of looks like this flower kind of follows it, or maybe you look and this pine cone looks like it kind of follows it, but you weren't quite sure. On this snail shell, the trap door that closes, the operculum, there's no mistaking the pattern. It is really clear, as good as anything. And so after you get a chance to see it, and you can pet it if you want to, tickle it under the chin, whatever you like to do, then we're going to pester it enough to make it close up on purpose up here so you can see that. All right. Well, that's going around. Let's talk about other things. Thank you for those. We're going to show them this real quick. I got a couple other things here that also crawl on their stomachs. These are sea slugs of a couple types. One of them is a sea slug called a sea lemon. Well, you can probably guess why. And it is a dorid. So there's two types of sea slugs, two groupings we have here. One are the nudibranchs, which means naked gills, right? Naked lungs, naked gills. And then the other ones are the dorids, which are these type. Dorids, and here's one called a yellow margin dorid. When it comes around, you'll be able to see it. They're very pretty when they're underwater. They have two rhinophores that stick up, sort of like antenna off the front, but they're totally soft. More like what you'd see in frilly, more like what you'd see on a moth, right? And then they have a little fluff at the back end that sticks out, poof, like a little rabbit or bunny tail sticking out. And so those are dorids. Dorids, like this type of a sea slug, these tend to eat sea sponge, usually. The nudibranchs, which are more fragile, so I don't always take them places, they fall apart very easy and they stress easy. Those tend to eat cnidarians. So they're eating polyp animals, right? Stinging polyp animals. And of the cnidarians, it's kind of a fun thing because the sea slugs that eat those, like there's this one called a shaggy mouse nudibranch, which is a fairly large white nudibranch with a whole lot of frills down its back. That type of sea slug actually commandeers the stinging parts of its prey. So it eats them, and then it takes some of those cnidocytes and the stinging harpoon parts and some of the venom, and it puts that into its own back, into the frills on its own back. So if something messes with it, it'll actually get stung like it's a sea anemone, which is amazing that it's able to do that. All right, we'll pass this guy around. If you want to touch those or pick them up, you're welcome to do that and look at the bottom of them. They're not nearly as slimy as the moon snail, so you won't get totally coated in slime with those, just a little bit. All right, before that moon snail comes back up, we'll pass this around too so you can see it. This is a little bit of something called a sand collar, and snails have lots of different ways that they lay eggs. God put a lot of variety in that. This one happens to be a moon snail egg case, and it would have been this big circle that looks like, you know a tire, like if you cut off the outside and you put it around one of those big traffic cylinder things, so it kind of faces down, but it's only half a tire cut in half? These look kind of like that when they're whole. And the way the snail lays them is the shell would be right here, and it would turn in a circle with its foot underneath, laying this gooey slime of eggs and sand in a big circle. And then that would harden. So this is actually full of sand, snail slime, and eggs, right, for the moon snail. And it's a fun thing. I like to share it partially just because it doesn't feel like it's organic. It feels like it's man-made, like plastic or rubber, and it's a fun thing to get to see. All right. All righty. We'll see if we can get this thing back or not. If we don't, it's okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a little bit of drawing, right? And so this is the part. It would be nice if this is working, but you know what? I think there's probably enough of us who understand Fibonacci numbers in this room that we can figure it out if we need to, if it doesn't decide to work for us. I'll try reopening it. Maybe that will help. That's okay. Okay, so if you take your little paper here, right? And we're going to make a Fibonacci spiral. Have any of you ever done that before or seen that done? Some of you, I think, have probably. And so the Fibonacci sequence works by adding the previous two numbers of the sequence together to get the next number, right? And then it builds off of that. And so some books will start you out saying that 0 is the first number, but I don't know, that just seems kind of odd to me because 0 plus 0 is still 0, so how do you ever get started? So I usually start people out with just number 1, right? And then, so if our first one is a 1, pick a spot 2/3 of the way over here, and then go on ahead and draw a real dark square around 1 square, right? That's going to be our first thing. It's a number 1. So 2/3 of the way across, kind of in the middle. I really darkened a spot around 1 single square right there. So this is our first one. Then what we're going to do is we're going to expand, and what's 1 plus 0 would be 1, right? So our next number also is a 1. So then right to the right of the first square you just did, go on ahead and draw a real dark square around the next little square. So now you've got 2 individual squares, graph squares, looking back at you right there. And then come up from that, because what's 1 plus 1? 2. So now we're going to draw and shade around or put our lines around a 2 by 2 square, so 4 squares total, right on top of these 2. So these 2 are here. Now we go up and we make those 4 into a square, right? A perfectly square block. And I'm going to go on ahead and I'm going to write the numbers right across the top as we're doing them so we can remember them, right? So here we have 1. So 0 plus 1 plus 1 plus, and then I guess I could just do a comma or something because we're just following a pattern, not necessarily adding these. So 0, 1, 1, 2. So our last 2 numbers were 2 and 1, so our next number is 3, right, if we add those 2 together? So now you take to the left of these, and you go 3 by 3, right, and shade or put a line around that square. Everyone getting it? Anyone need help? We can send somebody to help you out if you'd like help there. Right back there? All right, so if our last one, I'll walk that way while I'm talking, providing I don't get too much feedback off anything. We'll see. So if our last one was 3 and our one before that was 2, 3 plus 2 is 5. So our next one goes underneath a 5 by 5, right? Because the camera stopped working with the projectors, and I don't know why. So then our next one goes down. Yeah. I'm going to see if I can get it working again, but it was not being cooperative a second ago. Actually, you know what? Hey, Roxanna, are you still in here? Or did you head out? Can I use your phone? Yeah, I wonder if, when it's low battery, if it won't send to a projector anymore. There's the possibility of that. If that's the case, hers might be willing to. I don't know how to find the settings function. Hang on, I got to close some stuff. This is one way I think maybe women and men are different. I'm not sure. In our case, though, we always joke because I tend to close everything as soon as I'm done using it, and with her, it tends to stay open. Hey, look at that. We're going to run in here real quick and turn this there. Thank you. Okay, this is going to make this a lot easier for you because this is the one part I was wishing I had this thing for. And that will be good. Except for I don't know where your camera app is. I know, but I had to close it to go to the settings. Okay, whew. Okay, now look at this. Now we're doing good. So here we have our numbers, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. And here's our squares. 1, 1, 2, 2 by 2, 3 by 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 by 5, right? Yep. Okay, so what's our next one? If the last ones were 5 and 3? 8. So then we go over here. We're going in a circle as we come out, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It would actually go over to here. I'm going to have to get kind of creative. We're expanding rather quickly at this point. Thanks for bearing with me as we had to figure out that technology. Is that helping to see it up here now? Oh, hang on. That'll help even more. There we go. And then after 8, it would be 8 plus 5, which is what? Okay, so we're like, well, let's just go up here a ways. Way up there. And then we would be, so what was that, 8, 9, 13? And then it was 13 and 8. What is that, 21? Is that right? Yeah. So 21, which would be like this way, right? So suddenly we're way off the page with our sequence. But what we're looking at now is the spiral. So if we started right in here at 0, this was our 0 point, and we follow this spiral out, we can now draw a Fibonacci spiral coming off of this. Oh, that's where it got wet. Way up into there, and it would have to come back over here. Do you see that spiral coming off now? So that spiral shape is a Fibonacci pattern, and that's what we're going to look at on that snail in just a second. Does that make sense to everybody? Now that we finally got a visual of it that's good? So I love the fact that God makes things in patterns. He makes things organized. And I love the fact that he made our brains able to see and appreciate those patterns that he put in place. I think that is a really beautiful thing. There's not really, other than the fact that, God wanted us to be able to appreciate what he made, there may not be any other real reason we should actually be able to see and appreciate patterns like that, So it's a cool thing to get to see. How'd that big snail do? Did it get around? It's almost around? It's making its way. Good, good. Okay, here's a little snail real quick. Let's take a look at it first. I don't know that this one's going to show it quite as well. It will be there, but it'll be a little hard to see. So, whelks and winkles are the two small types of snails you usually find at tide pools. And this one, if you look from the end, that one isn't very good because it's got a lot of barnacles on it. Oh, hang on just a second, though. We're going to take advantage of this moment because down here, this sea cucumber has opened up its feeding end for us. So we get to see that. So in the middle, you can see its mouth. It's shoving some of those dust mop arms into its mouth currently. I'm going to try to put this down in there. Sorry if I drop your phone, Roxanna. So it's shoving those dust mop parts down into the center of its mouth right now and, sucking them off, sucking them clean as it feeds. Anyway, I'm glad we actually got to see that because you wouldn't have gotten to see that as it was getting passed around. Okay, so on a snail shell, Sometimes you can see the Fibonacci spiral looking off the end of the snail shell. So a snail starts, and the initial part of the shell would have been this little bit way out here by my fingertips. That would have been the little baby snail, right, or the young snail. And then it would have grown, laying down additional lines of shell material as it went around. And sometimes on this shell itself, you can actually see the lines coming across in the patterning as it would have laid them down, right? And then it grew farther and farther and farther this way. And then this little thing in here is that trap door we talked about. And you're not going to be able to see it real clear on that because that's mostly one color. The lines aren't very obvious on this particular type of snail. It would be there, but it wouldn't be as obvious. So instead of that one, we're going to go on ahead and pester this snail so that we can look at its shell parts better. It's not going to love this, but it also won't hurt it any. And I doubt it has the memory to retain the torturous thing I'm about to do by tickling it. Everyone who got to see it with its foot out got to, right? Who wanted to? Because it won't put its foot out again today after I do this. So here it is. There's its foot. The trapdoor part we want to look at is right here. And it's going to close behind the foot, right? But to do that, we need to pester this snail enough that it feels slightly unsafe, so it will decide to close itself. As soon as it begins to close, you'll know right away because a huge amount of liquid and slime will begin leaving the snail, which is why I've got the towel down there already because I know what's coming. We'll give it a few knocks here so it wonders what's happening. Hello, 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 hello. Boy, you tamed the snail today. I guess so. He likes it here. Hello, hello. It is getting a little bit tighter and ever so slightly smaller, but it still hasn't committed to going into its shell yet. So it needs more massaging. There is a little bit of slime. Hello, anyone home? Boy, this is the bravest snail of all time. I guess so. You want to go in? No, I don't know what the deal is. I like moon snails, though, because the banding on them is so obvious, so I'm really hoping it'll go in for us to be able to see it really well. If not, could we get enough to see it? Probably. I'm going to clean it with my finger. It's covered in slime and sand. I should have gotten a volunteer to help with this part. Not cooperating? Okay, there we go. We'll give it some rinsing. Come on. Come on. We're making some progress now. You see the water starting to drain? It's not loving this too much. There we go. Now we're committed now. Maybe I got to keep knocking. Yeah. Whoa. Oh my goodness. Okay, there we go. Now we're good. Okay, it's decided it's going now. That's good. The fastest I've ever seen one of these close, and I don't want to do it to it because it seems kind of mean, but I one time had a little kid holding one of these who was like, 4 years old or something, and he took the thing and he threw it at the ground. And it hit the ground. It didn't break or anything. You know how kids just throw things sometimes when you don't expect it. Whoosh, there it goes. And so it dropped on the ground and hit the ground. It was It was relatively soft, and so it didn't hurt the snail any, but boy, that thing closed up like you would not believe into a little puddle of goo on the ground. That was all that was left. Okay, I think this will be enough. I'm thinking it might close more. There we go. You're lucky you aren't in a class with me, because what I do about this point when it's really starting to bubble out of there is I run around the room putting it all over all the tables. And the kids are all, fleeing from their desks. Can you believe there's that much water in there? We're still going. I'm going to come down a little bit so I don't get any onto the carpet, because now it's really moving. Occasionally, once they close, they'll stay. Whoa! Okay, there we go. We're at the end now, I guess. Oh. All right. Got kind of a little more violent at the end there. Okay, let's rub that up. Clean it nicely so you can look at it. And hopefully it won't make too big of an additional mess on the table. Okay, that's nicely closed now. All right, whew, we made it. It was a marathon, but we made it. And this is now turned off again, huh? Uh-oh, it isn't my face that it needs. There we go. Hopefully that'll kick back on. There. Whoop, bad Siri. All right, so this right here is the snail that's all closed up now. There's a couple different things we can check out while it's sitting here, apart from the fact it's giving me more water still, which I don't really want up there. There we go. When we look at the snail shell itself, you can see the spiral now in the snail shell, right? And then when we look at the operculum, which is one of my favorite words because of what it does to your lips and tongue when you say it. Operculum. It's just fun. It makes you smile somehow. But it's shooting all over my microscope now. This is a very disobedient snail. Okay, when we look there at the operculum now, we'll be able to see that it has that Fibonacci design. Do you see it built into it? In fact, let me turn it around. Then it will look a lot like the one that's on my paper even. So let's see, if we go that way, there it is on my paper. You got it? There it is on the snail. Pretty amazing, isn't it? And so I just think it's amazing how God built that in, that things grow based on patterns like that. Flowers, snails, pine cones, to some extent galaxies. Even tropical storms maybe sometimes. Pretty amazing. Okay, let's pass this around, because it's fun to actually see this thing all closed up. You'll be amazed by how heavy it is. I'm still going to pass it with a container, just for everyone's benefit. And because, we want the church to enjoy having these meetings here. What has happened? Okay. Last thing I want to look at with you just for a second or two, for a few minutes rather, are some crabs, because crustaceans, we haven't talked about them, and there's a lot of crabs in Oregon. That's a big part of Oregon and Washington economy. And it's a fun thing to get to see, and crabs do some really weird stuff also. So let's talk about crabs. This right here is a speckled red rock crab. Sometimes I get the other red rock crabs. Of course, in Oregon, there are pretty much just a couple types of crabs that you see a lot of, for seafood at least. Red rock crab are one you sometimes see. Most of the time you see Dungeness crab, right? I usually like the speckled red rock crab. They're less aggressive than the other ones. One of the weird things that I didn't expect when I started doing this is that crabs have different personalities based on the exact species you're looking at, right? They almost always interact the same way. So these speckled red rock crabs with the dark pinchers and little speckles on their abdomen down in here, they, when they get scared, they do this into a ball, and they just sit there forever. The other ones, the other regular red rock crab, when they get scared, they do that, right? And then the Dungeness are kind of a combination of those things. So a couple interesting things to note about crabs. One, how many legs does a crab have? I ask kids that, and they always shoot out lots of different numbers, right? So here we go. If you are thinking a crab has 6 legs, raise your hand. If you're thinking a crab has 8 legs, raise your hand. If you're thinking a crab has, okay, let's throw out a really weird one, 7 legs, raise your hand. Oh, whew, most of you didn't guess that one, that's good. Usually God does things in patterns and in order, right? Usually in 2s for legs, so that's good. Okay, how about 10 legs? Alrighty. So if you guess decapod with 10 legs, you're right, that's how scientists would classify it. I can see why you'd say 8 legs, though, because they have 8 of these legs, right? Not counting the pinchers. The chelipeds, these pinchers, are modified front legs. That's how scientists would usually classify those. And then if you look at the face of the crab, you can see these mouth parts moving, right? These are maxilla, and then inside are maxillipeds. And those mouth parts are how they hold, almost like little arms, their food when they're going to eat it. And then inside of that, they have jaws, which there's 2 jaws. And you know how crabs walk sideways? Because that's how God made their knees to work? Well, it turns out, along with, oh, there we go, we're going to get a little action here. It turns out, along with walking sideways with their legs, because that's how their joints are, crabs also have jaws that work sideways with little teeth on them. And so those are located inside of there in the mouth. They have a couple eyes that stick up on little stalks here. And if we want to, without being too mean to it, I can go on ahead and poke one of those and we'll see what happens. You ready? Whew! You didn't like that very much. I pulled it in. So they have that. They have different sets of these right here, which are little antennae off the front. There's 4 of them right there. And they have frilly ends on them that sense the chemicals in the water. That's like a crab's sense of smell. Because God gave every animal what it needs to survive, right? So what does a crab need to survive? It needs the ability to have an armored shell. It needs the ability to hold on tight to the bottom of the ocean, even if there's a current, and dig into the sand or swim at times. And it needs the ability to defend itself and rip apart meat. And then when you look here, it needs the ability to find its food using these antennae to sense the chemicals in the water. So those are all things that a crab needs. These parts here are a little bit like arms. They actually can move up and down. And then inside of there, there's even more. So talking about patterns for a second, if we've got 8 legs, that would probably be classified as an arachnid, right? By many people. If we have 6 legs, it's probably something more like an insect. If we have 10 legs, it's a decapod. It's a crab or crustacean, potentially. And then those front ones are modified, like we said. But when you take a crab like this and you consider patterns, we have 5 legs on each side, right? Well, guess how many joints God put into this leg? You ready? Does anyone want to guess? Patterns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? 5. This pattern of 5s and 10s follows a lot of the crab's body, actually. And then guess how many maxilla and maxillipeds there are on each side here in the mouth? 5 on each side. So there's another 10 pattern, right? Another 5, 5, 10 pattern. So it follows patterns really closely within the body of this animal, which is fun to see. All right. And then they have the hard carapace on the back. There's a few odd things about crabs, too. Would you like to hear some of the gross, disgusting, odd things? Most people want to hear those, so we'll probably go over them. So this crab is a scavenger, right? When scavengers eat the dead stuff off the bottom, rotten meat, stuff like that, dead things. Things that you and I would not eat because we would get sick. So if meat has been not really refrigerated properly, or if it's just real old, or if it's just seafood, which goes bad like instantly, right? Like you turn around in a circle and you haven't cooked it and it's bad on your stove, then it grows bacteria very quickly. And because of that, a crab is eating meat that's contaminated by bacteria on the surface of it quite a bit, right? So how does a crab handle that? Well, there's a couple ways. This one's the really weird way, though. You know how you go number 1 and number 2, correct? I told you it's going to be kind of gross, right? Well, crabs do the number 2 business with the roughage. Out here where their abdomen is curled up, there's an intestine, the canal that runs the food out right here at the end of this, and they would go to the bathroom right here when they tore that abdomen and tail out, right? The telson and abdomen. So that's where the roughage comes out. That's like the number 2 business. So the number 1 business, the kidneys of a crab that collect the waste are located right up here near the eyes in this part of the body, like right here inside the crab. And whenever they have to relieve themselves, right inside in here, on either side, there's a little spot on most crabs called a green gland. Have any of you ever heard of that? And a green gland is where the waste comes out, right? And it turns out that that waste is pretty good at sanitizing things. So before a crab eats something, I guess you could say it goes to the bathroom on it to sanitize it, and then it eats it to make sure all the bacteria are dead. I told you it'd be kind of disgusting, right? But also kind of interesting and pretty amazing that that's how their body works. Pretty unique design. I mean, why not use what you got to make it work out well? So that's kind of a fun thing. I'll leave you with one more thing. Sometimes I bring a little vial of it. I forgot to pack it, though, so you'll just have to take my word on it. You know how your blood is red-colored? We might be able to see in the joints of this crab. Sometimes you can see there. So right here on this joint, right there, let's see if we can get in closer. Right in front of my finger, do you see that? That's not actually red-colored. If you see it up here in person, it's kind of a bluish-green color and a little bit clearish, like a translucent blue-green. So what is it in your blood that carries the oxygen? You know what the thing is, probably. Iron and hemoglobin, right? Well, in a crab or an octopus, they don't use that. Does anyone know what crabs use? What's that? Yeah, copper. They're using hemocyanin, right? So they have copper-based blood instead of iron-based blood that they use to transport the oxygen around in their body. And one odd thing about that, I don't know, when I get to heaven, I'm going to have to try to remember to ask God about this one. Why did you make crab blood out of copper when copper's super toxic to invertebrates? Like it kills, so crabs barely survive with the copper in their blood, probably. Like they aren't great at tolerating copper. So why on earth did they get copper blood? I have no idea, but they have it. And so when you see blood from a crab, it's kind of a clearish bluish green color. And the other interesting thing, do you see how this crab is all tucked in and really slow right now? In fact, if I take, oh, maybe you can't. Well, that's okay. We're almost done here. If I take this crab here and I take the leg and I flick the leg like this, do you see how it's like really limp now? It barely moves on its own. So crabs don't have a closed circulatory system. You and I have that, right? Check this out. I'll show you the most amazing thing you probably have seen all year, okay? Here we go. Are you ready? This is a pretty cool trick I learned. Ta-da! I'm not passed out. I know. Thank you. Well, in my body, of course, like yours, you have a closed circulatory system, so when you move, your blood vessels can constrict. You have various parts of your body that force blood other places so you don't lose the blood in your head, right? When you stand up quick or do other things, hopefully. In the case of a crab, they have an open circulatory system, which means they have some tubes that take the blood up to their heart, and it pumps the blood through their gills, and then it just goes throughout their body, like an empty or an open sac inside the body around the organs. So when we're looking at this crab, and it's sitting on its back, guess where all the blood has gone? Yeah, back in here. So its heart isn't able to pump the blood very efficiently, so it's not getting very much oxygen, and the blood is not really in the legs anymore, so there's no oxygen here. So when you hold a crab upside down for very long, they'll just sit there, And it's crazy because if you're in a boat with a bunch of Dungeness crab, the real big ones, that look real scary, if you turn them right side up, they go crazy on you. If you turn them upside down and leave them, they'll sit there until they die. It's bizarre. But that's how God put them together. And the way that they know what's up and down. So you know how we have an inner ear? We have an inner ear that can tell us kind of what's up and down inside of us. Well, crabs have a statocyst, which means they have, here you go, don't mess with the business end on the pinchers unless you are okay with getting pinched, just a heads up, just in case. I'll put a couple in here too. This is a little male and a little female crab coming around. So crabs have a statocyst, which it works a little different, but inside, right below their antenna, they have a little round thing with cilia, little hairs all around it, a little open space, and nerves going to it. And when they're little, they collect a little piece of something that's heavy, like a little heavy grain of sand. In our area, I've heard it's often ilmenite, which is like, I think that's iron and titanium or something like that, potentially, and that is quite heavy. And so when they're right side up, it sits on this edge, but if the crab flips upside down, it hits the little hairs or cilia on the other side, right? So then they know they're upside down, so they flip back over, which is pretty important to them when you consider that a crab can't be upside down for very long or it can't move its legs again. So, pretty amazing. Yeah, so anyway, I've had fun sharing with you. I'm excited about the way that God made everything that we have here in the Northwest so beautiful, so well designed, so following of patterns that we can actually understand, right? And it's just fun to marvel at it. So hopefully you had a chance to just kind of enjoy marveling at the design around us here in the Northwest and some of these creatures that you don't really get to see every day, right? So afterward, I can take some questions here. I think Mark was hoping I'd take some questions from people here at the end. But also, we have the tank of stuff out front, just outside the front door. We didn't set it up inside for obvious reasons because of the potential for, disastrous mess. But it's just out there. So on your way out, if you want to see or hold or check out anything else, there's some stuff we didn't even talk about that's in there. You're more than welcome to do that. So, shall I open it up for questions?
Yes, question and answer time. Thank you very much, Joel. This has been interesting. And Milt, have a microphone for you.